And voting is actually one of the issues addressed in the U.S. State Department's annual reports on global human rights, the first under the new Secretary of State, John Kerry.
Now, Secretary Kerry says the hope embodied by the early days of the Arab Spring has run up against the harsh realities of political transition. I talked about that with our State Department correspondent, Scott Stearns. So, Scott, of course, these country reports that the State Department releases each year, they don't include rankings. But if you could highlight for us maybe one of the countries that was identified as being one of the worst offenders in terms of human rights, and then another country that might have been showing progress.
Sure. Secretary Kerry mentioned China and its repression of Tibetan nationals and the Uyghur minorities as of continuing concern for the United States. On Burma, Secretary Kerry and this report reflect some pretty serious progress. As you know, this is for the calendar year 2012, so the report reflected a lot of the changes that we saw in 2012.
All the reforms.
The emergence of Aung San Suu Kyi and her political party, her election to the National Assembly, the government's loosening of media restrictions. For instance, now there's free press or a freer press in Burma.
Now, I wanted to get to Syria specifically because Kerry had some very strong words on Syria.
You can imagine, what Syrian civilians have gone through or went through in 2012. The complete breakdown of central authority in a lot of areas. There was concern expressed in this human rights report about Syrian civilians who are living in areas that are still under the control of the Bashar al-Assad government in Damascus, but also civilians who are living in areas where there appears to be little control or control by groups that the United States believes are affiliated with al-Qaeda.
And do these countries studied actually pay attention to these reports?
It's hard to say. I mean, some more than others. Some countries do respond to the human rights report. China has really made a point in the last few years of responding oftentimes within the same news cycle to what it expects the United States will say about China. This year, China expressed its own concerns about the human rights situation in the United States.
Right. But the U.S. doesn't evaluate itself in these reports, right? This is strictly looking at the rest of the world.
This is a look at human rights around the world generally compiled by people who work at the embassy in those respective countries. In countries like Iran, where there is no embassy, that work is done more by working with groups and organizations that operate in that country. So it's obviously harder to come up with information about a country where you don't have an embassy.
I wanted to also talk about the timing of the release of this report this year. It was a bit of unfortunate timing in light of the events that took place in Boston with the bombings.
Secretary Kerry, who, as you know, represented Massachusetts for a long time in the United States Senate, so he clearly felt personally the events that were going on in Boston. He said in releasing the report that they had considered delaying the release, but that he felt it was important to go forward because running a marathon without terror or enjoying a holiday without terror is a fundamental human right as well. And so he felt that it was necessary to push forward with that.
How does that apply to the way that the U.S. and diplomats in the U.S. feel in other countries as well?
The feeling is that the United States, I believe, in doing this human rights report, recognizing some of its own human rights shortfalls, that the United States is not perfect, does try to apply this universal standard to allowing or evaluating the freedom that people around the world live in, that space, that sort of space for civil discourse and the ability, as we say, to enjoy a day free of terror. And one of the observations of this human rights report was a shrinking of that space for civil discourse in some countries.